Hello everyone, and welcome to Get Started Fast with Avid's Media Composer 7, presented by Avid Blogs. My name is Kevin P McAuliffe, and I'm a 3-time North American ProMax award-winning editor and a media composer editor for over 15 years, as well as being one of the senior editors at MyJo in Toronto. And you can always find me in the Avid community forums in the Media Composer and Symphony Getting Started Fast forum. And in this 5-part tutorial series, we're going to take you through everything you need to know to get started with Media Composer 7 as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Okay, let's get started. Let's Command and Tab into Avid's Media Composer, and we are greeted by the project selection window. Now there's a few important things we're going to want to note before we actually get in and start editing. The first thing right at the very top here is the user profile. Now you'll see right now the user is set to be me. Now something that's important to keep in mind is that anyone coming from Final Cut 7 will know that the user inside of Final Cut is based on whoever is logged into the computer. That's not the case inside of Media Composer. In Media Composer, you can have multiple editors working on one login. Obviously, this is the same for both Mac and Windows, so something important to keep in mind. In this case, because I'm the only editor on this system, there is only me. But conceivably, you could have 10, 15, 20, 30 different editors all working on the system, obviously with unique settings that we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay, let's move on and let's talk about the different types of projects that you can have. You'll see right now that my project type is set to be external, meaning I'm saving this project onto an external hard drive. Obviously, the advantage to that is by having the projects and the media on an external drive, at any point a client could call me, I could simply unplug that drive, pack it into my bag, drive on over to my client's location, plug back in, and I'll be up and running literally in minutes. Now, depending on how you need to work, you can set your project up as private. Now, the difference between a private project and an external project, as you can see right up here by the folder that the project's going into, right now on my Mac, it's going into Users, Kevin P McAuliffe, Documents, Avid Projects, meaning that only me, when I'm logged in, will be able to see this project. Nobody else that has a login on this computer will have access to it. Obviously, moving down, you'll see that I can also create a shared project. The shared project goes to a slightly different location, basically now meaning that this project can be shared across users. It doesn't matter who the logged in user happens to be. Now, obviously, this is the same for all of you Windows users as well. What I'm going to do is just select an external project, and let's come down now and let's create a new project. And let me show you how this is going to work. Now, as soon as I click on the New Project button, you'll see that we're now greeted by, of course, the New Project window. So let's call our new project MC Getting Started. Now, if I come over here to the Format, you'll see that I can click on the Format dropdown, and I'm now greeted by all of the different formats that I'm going to have access to inside of Media Composer. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that this window, the format, is really going to determine 4 things in your workflow: how you import media, how you digitize media, the type of sequence that Media Composer creates for you, and to a certain extent, how you're going to export clips. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't import any type of file size, any frame rate, any resolution, and work with it in your timeline, because you can. What's important to keep in mind is that by creating a 720p 23976 timeline, everything at the end of the day will conform to that frame rate. Now, what's also important to keep in mind is that you can work in like frame rates inside of a project, meaning that once I create a 720p 23976 project, I'm also in that project going to have access to being able to work in 23976p NTSC as well as 1080p 23976. Now, obviously, coincidentally, if you happen to be working in an NTSC 30i project, 30 frames per second or 2997 frames per second, you'll have access to not only that resolution, but you'll also have access to 720p 2997 as well as 5994i. So something important to keep in mind when you're working. Now, in this case, I'm just going to select 720p 23976. I'm simply going to say OK, and let's simply say OK to launch this project, and Media Composer is now going to launch my newly created project, and it's going to open a bin for me to start working with. Now, for the purposes of what we're doing right now, I don't have any media in this bin, so I'm just going to close this bin. I'm simply going to select it, right-click on it, and we're going to delete it because I'm going to open a bin from a different project. Okay, now before we get in and we open a bin that has some media in it, I want to talk about the 3 windows that we now have access to inside of our project. The first window is located right over here on the left-hand side, and it's appropriately enough the project window. And the first tab that we're in inside of the project window is the Bins tab. Obviously, this is where we're going to have all the bins that will contain all of the media that we need to finish our edit. The next tab right beside it is the Volumes tab, where we can get in and create new volumes. We have the ability to get in and adjust our settings, which we're going to talk about coming up next. I can also get in and add filters right here from within the project window if I want to, but there's an alternate way to do it, which we're probably going to use that we'll talk about in a later lesson. Next, we have the Format tab, where we can get in and, as I mentioned in the intro, we can get in and adjust to like frame rates, as well as getting in and adjusting the raster dimension, as well as stereoscopic options right here from within the project window. We can get in and take a look at some general usage and some general info about the project and system we happen to be working on. Now, the next window that you're going to see immediately to the right over here is the Composer window. The Composer window is where you're basically going to make all of the decisions that you're going to want to make as far as what parts of clips to edit into your timeline. We have the Preview window located right here, as well as the Sequence window right here that reflects what's going on right down here in your timeline window. Timeline window is obviously where you're actually going to take the clips and drop them into order and do your effects work as well as audio mixing to get your project done as quickly and efficiently as possible. Okay, so let's talk about some settings that we're going to want to adjust before we start editing. I'm going to navigate over here to the Settings tab, and the first one that I always like to get in and adjust is my bin settings. Why? Well, because inside of my bin settings is the auto save interval. Basically, how often is Media Composer going to save any open bins in your project? Now, for me, I normally have this set to be something low, somewhere around, about 10 minutes. Obviously, this is a personal preference, and you can set this to be whatever you like. I'm just going to say OK. Now, the next setting that I like to get in and adjust, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here, is the Composer settings. The Composer settings are obviously for this window up here, the Composer window. And in most cases, what I like to do is I like to have 2 rows of data, because you can never have too much information when you're editing. And for me personally, because I normally use all of my shortcuts on the keyboard, I normally only like to have 1 row here. I don't need to have 2 rows because, like I said, I'm a keyboard editor, and I always like to have the center duration selected, meaning that if I mark an in point and an out point in my timeline or in a clip, it's always going to show me the duration right up here, right at the top of the Composer window. Okay, what I'm going to do is simply say OK, and because I now have 1 row of buttons selected, you're going to see 1 row disappear. There we go. Now, the next setting that I like to get in and adjust is the General setting. Right here. Why the General setting? Because this is where I can get in and set the default time code for any sequence that I happen to create for any project that I'm working on. Now, in most cases, because I put bars and tone and slate at the beginning of all of my pieces, I normally have this set to be 590000. Now, another shortcut I want to mention to you is that you're going to notice that when I was punching in 590000, the 2 zeros appear together as opposed to me going like this, 0000. Well, if you use the period at the bottom of the numeric pad, it's actually going to put in 2 zeros for you. A very handy shortcut to keep in mind when you're editing. What I'm going to do now is just punch back in 5900. I'm going to say OK. And the next setting that I want to talk about is right down here, and it's called the Media Creation setting. I'm going to double click on Media Creation. Now, the first tab inside of Media Creation is the drive filtering and indexing, because when I'm working, I don't want to accidentally capture or import or render anything to my system or my launch drive. So I'm just going to filter both of those drives out. Now, the Media Creation setting also lets you get in and tell Media Composer where you want to send your captures, titles, imports, mixdowns and transcodes, motion effects, and renders to. So if you have multiple different drives, and let's say you want to send the captures to one drive and the titles to a different drive, you can simply just come into each one of these tabs and assign the drive that you want to have that particular parameter sent to. Now, in this case, I only have 1 drive, so everything is going to be going to my Mac drive, but just having the ability to get in and sending all these different things to different drives based on obviously how full your drives are is a very handy feature to have. Okay, so I'm just simply going to say OK, and the next setting, and probably the most important one other than your autosave, is your keyboard settings. Let's talk about keyboard settings right now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to navigate up, and you'll see keyboard settings located right here. I'm simply going to double click on it. And once I double click on it, you're going to see my keyboard settings, and you're going to see that I've added some additional features here for the F keys. Now, this is always an interesting situation, the keyboard settings, because I know a lot of editors who like to get in and literally change every key on the keyboard. And I always tell editors that are starting out to never do that. Now you might be wondering why. Well, there's actually a very simple reason. I mean, if you are an editor that only edits at one location, let's say on your own edit system, you know what, get in and change the keyboard settings as much as you want. But if you're a freelance editor and you're going from location to location to location, and let's say you have your settings on a USB stick that you take with you, what's going to happen the one day that you forget your settings? Normally you take the settings, you stick them in, you're going to open them, boom, you're up and running in 2 seconds. The problem is that if you've gotten in and adjusted the keyboard, let's just say every key is different, and you've forgotten that USB key at home, guess what? You're now going to have to rebuild that entire keyboard. Whereas for me, because I only adjust the F keys at the top, guess what? It's going to take me probably about a minute to rebuild these settings. Now, one thing that you don't see in here that you do have the ability to do is that if I hold down the Shift key, I do have the ability to toggle the Shift key and add a whole bunch more shortcuts in here. So I can have a Shift R or a Shift D or a Shift and function keys functionality to add as many shortcuts as I might want. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Kev, you have all of your settings here, but how do you get in and add more? And I'm just going to use the F11 key as an example here. So how do we get in and add more settings to this keyboard? Well, there's actually 2 tools that you need to get in and make keyboard adjustments. We obviously need our keyboard setting, but we need one more. And I'm going to navigate up to Tools, and I'm going to come down to the Command Palette. Once I open the Command Palette, you're going to see that it is just what it sounds like. This is basically a palette where every command that you might want to need is stored for you to basically take, and let's just use, I'm just going to use the step forward 1 frame shortcut. You're going to see right now I'm on a button-to-button reassignment. I can now simply take that and drag it down to F11 and let it go, and that shortcut has now been added to my keyboard. Now for me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to the other settings, and I'm just going to put that back as being blank because I obviously don't want that on my settings. Now I did say that this is where you can find most of the shortcuts that you're going to want to use, but not all of them. Well, what did I mean by that? Well, inside of Media Composer, you also have the ability to map anything from a menu to a button as well. And let me show you how simple that is to do. I'm going to come down to Menu to Button Reassignment. I'm now going to come down and I'm going to click on that F11. And let's say I wanted to assign the Command Palette to F11. I'm going to navigate back up to Tools. I'm going to come down to Command Palette. And you're going to see the Command Palette has now appeared at F11. Let's close the Command Palette. Let's close our keyboard settings. And now if I hit F11 on my keyboard, you're going to see there is the Command Palette. What's also cool about the Command Palette is I do have the ability, if I happen to have multiple monitors, to leave the Command Palette open. So now what this basically means is by selecting the active palette, I can use any of these as commands, not necessarily as a drag and assign to buttons, but if I wanted to collapse something in my timeline, I could simply click on it here without mapping it to anything on my keyboard or in my Composer window, and that command will function as a command and collapse the layers in my timeline. Okay, I'm just going to close the Command Palette. Let's come back to our bins, and let's open a bin that has some media in it so I can show you how bins work. I'm simply going to hit Command and O on the keyboard on the Mac, Control and O on Windows. I'm just going to navigate to my stock footage folder here, and I'm going to come into my motocross bin right here. I'm simply going to say Open, and you'll see now I can double click on any one of these clips, and we now have access to all of the media here. Now I'm just going to bring the bin right over here into the middle of the window, and I'm just going to extend it out because I want to show you all of the information that I can see inside of this bin. The only problem is that there's a lot of information in here that I don't need, and there's some information that I do want that is not in here. So how do I get in and make adjustments to the different columns that I have? Well, it's very simple. We're going to navigate right down here to our Fast menu. I'm simply going to click on it, and I'm going to navigate right up here to Choose Columns. You'll see now that you have an absolutely staggering amount of information that you can take a look at inside of any given bin. Now what I normally like to do is I like to select everything and then select nothing, because I like to set up a standard bin all of the time. And I'm going to come right down here, and what I normally like to have set up is the drive, the duration, the end, and the start. I'm just going to come all the way down here to Start. There it is right there, and I'm simply going to say, okay, you know what, maybe I'll select tape as well. I'll say okay, and you'll see now that we now have the name of the clip, the duration, the drive, the start, the tape, and the end. Well, that's kind of not really how I would want this organized. I'd actually rather have the name, the start, the end, the duration, the drive, and then the tape. So it can't just be as easy as dragging the columns, is it? Well, it actually is. Take a look at this. I can now simply just drag the columns wherever I want, and when I have things laid out exactly as I need them, I can navigate right down here and simply say Save As. We'll call this Kevin's Standard View. And now, because I've created a new bin view, what I can do is simply navigate right back up to my settings tab. If I scroll all the way up to the top, you're going to see there it is right there. And if I don't want any of these other ones, I can simply select them by holding Command on the Mac control and Windows and then just deleting them. There we go, and you'll see they will not appear now in the bin view menu. Now you can obviously get in and create as many bin views as you like, and you can even share them across users. Okay, now one other thing I want to point out in bins quickly is the fact that right now I'm looking at everything in text view. It's obviously giving me the name of the clip, it's giving me the start, the end, and really it's sort of an informational view that I'm looking at. But what if I'm more of a visual editor and I actually want to see the starting frame of each one of these shots? How would I get in and see that? Well, right down here at the bottom, you're going to see that I can come down and I do have 3 different bin views that I can adjust between. I have one right over here on the right that's called storyboard mode. I can get in and actually make detailed notes about each one of these shots. You know, if I happen to be a producer and maybe I'm making notes for an editor, this is a great way to get in and leave tons of information about each one of these shots. But the view that I really want to show you is located right here, and that is of course frame view. A very cool way to get in and have a visual representation of the first frame of each one of these shots. Now, how would I get in and adjust the size of these? Maybe these are too big or too small. Well, it's actually very easy. What I'm going to do is hold Command on the Mac control and Windows, and I'm going to use the L key and I'm going to use the K key. L to make the frames larger, K to make the frames smaller. And what I can also do is, let's say, you know, I wanted them to be very small, about that size, and I wanted them to fill the entire window. Most people start going like this. They start going, okay, well, I'm just going to move all these over here like this and kind of do that, and that's already way too much work. When all you really need to do is navigate up to your bin drop-down and come down and say fill window, and you'll see now that the frames extend all the way across the bin as far as they'll go, and then continue down on the next row. But what I want to do is I want to increase the size of these again as large as I can make them, because I want to show you one other cool feature of working in this mode. I'm going to navigate back up to bin, come down to fill window. Of course, we could always set that as a keyboard shortcut if we wanted to. What I want to do is, in most cases, people would say, okay, well, I can see the first frame of each one of these shots, but I can't see what's going on in the shot. So I'm just going to double click on this one and I'm going to play it. Okay, well, this isn't exactly what I want. So I'm going to double click on this one and I'm going to play it. Okay, and then I'm going to double click on, and you can see how this can become a very time intensive process. I really wish there was a way just to select a clip inside of a bin, press the L key, which corresponds to play, and play that clip right from within the bin. Well, guess what? I've now selected the clip, I've hit play on the keyboard, and I can now actually watch the clip right from within my bin. So this way I'll know before I even double click on it to take a look at it in the composer whether this is a shot that I would even want to use. And another cool feature is the fact that I can actually press the L key multiple times to take a look at any one of these clips faster than real time. Let's take a look at this one. I'm going to simply hit play. You'll see the shot is super slowed down. So I'm just going to hit L a couple more times and take a look. I can now see this much, much faster. Another fantastic feature built right into your bins. Okay, now before I wrap up this lesson, I want to talk a little bit about organization, because organization is obviously key to any edit. Normally how I like to break down my workflows into 4 main categories: sequences, audio, clips, and graphics. Now I'm not telling you to have 4 bins, but I'm telling you to use this as a guideline. What I normally like to do, and I'm just going to create a few bins here. I'll just create, let's say, 5 bins. And I'm going to call one bin voiceovers. And I'm going to call one bin location sound. And I'm going to call one bin sequences. And I'm going to call one bin imported clips. And I'm going to call the last bin location clips. Now, this is pretty organized with only 5 bins, but I've seen edits that will have 20, 30, 40, 50 different bins, and going in, it just becomes a big mess attempting to find anything, when you can really be very simply organized by using folders. What we're going to do is navigate up to the fast menu, and I'm going to come down and simply create a new folder. And I'm actually going to create 4 new folders, and you're going to see why in just a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call the first one audio. I'm going to call the second one clips. I'm going to call the third one graphics, and of course I'm going to call the last one sequences. And what we're going to do now is simply take our sequences and put it in that sequences folder. We're going to take our audio bins and we're going to put them in the audio folder. We're going to take our clips bins and we're going to stick them in the clips folder, and take a look at what we have now. a very, very organized project with no confusion as to what's what. If I need to find the sequences, I can simply come into the sequences folder. If I need to find all my clips bins, I can simply come into the clips folder. So obviously keeping organized is exceptionally important, and using this technique is a simple way to keep organized by still giving you the flexibility of having as many bins as you want. Okay, so that wraps up lesson 1. In lesson 2, we're going to talk about acquisition, including importing and capturing. So if you want to get post-production workflow tutorials and industry insight that you need to bring great stories to life, head on over to avidblogs.com/post.